Thank you, Cardinal Sean, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great honor to be here. I am delighted to have an opportunity to join with you in supporting the Redemptoris Mater Seminary. The work that the seminary is doing is just critically important for the reasons that Father Tony and others have indicated. You know that's true, or you wouldn't be here this evening. But we are facing some very serious challenges as Catholics. And those challenges will require us to have outstanding, truly dedicated, courageous, and self-sacrificial clergy, as well as truly dedicated, courageous, and self-sacrificial laity. I'll be talking a bit about those challenges, the specifics of those challenges in a few minutes. I'll actually devote my remarks this evening to those challenges. But before doing that, I do want to thank Cardinal Sean for inviting me, and I want to pay tribute to the Cardinal because he is a great hero of mine. When he was appointed to be Archbishop of this Archdiocese, I suspect there weren't a lot of people clamoring for the job. Tough times, and they required a tough guy. Also a very gentle guy. And somehow that combination was found to exist in Cardinal Sean. It's just what we needed, and fortunately he was available, and I just watched with great admiration, Cardinal, what you've done to rebuild the church. Father Andrew, who has disappeared, said earlier that Cardinal Sean is an example to us all, and I think he was speaking of us all, meaning us all priests. But really, Cardinal Sean is an example to us all Catholics, and it's an example that we would do very well to emulate. Indeed, we have to, for the sake of our church, for the sake of our children, for the sake of the gospel. We have to emulate the example that Cardinal Sean has set. I want to thank Father Medeiros for the honor of being here this evening. I know I'm following a tough act. My dear friend John Garvey, the president of Catholic University, who spoke last year. I'm not going to be able to match that, although I'm going to do my very best. But I'm very honored, Father Tony, that you would invite me. And I congratulate you on the work of the seminary and your work in building the seminary. The seminary considered as that place of education that's educating these outstanding young men as our future priests. And now building the seminary in the sense of the physical structure that you're going to build with the help of so many faithful supporters of the seminary. And then I want to say congratulations to my co-honoree, Mr. Zofchak, and his wife. I'm honored to be honored alongside you. I've learned about the great support that you have given, not only to the seminary, but to Catholic causes up here, and I salute you. I said that I would speak about some of the challenges that we Catholics face. They're very serious challenges. We're up against more tough times. But they are not challenges that we face alone. The same challenges are faced by other believers, other people of faith. They are faced by our evangelical Protestant friends. They are faced by our Orthodox Jewish friends, who are truly, in the words of Pope John Paul II, our elder brothers in faith. They're faced by the Latter-day Saints community, the Mormons. They are faced by the growing Muslim community in the United States. These are very serious challenges. Secularism is bearing down very hard on our culture and on believers, especially parents who are trying to raise children to be people of faith, especially children who are under a barrage from the media, from the educational establishment, from the entertainment industry, you name it. There is so much pressure against the faith that we believers across these religious traditions are attempting to impart to our children. And that requires that we cooperate across the historic lines of religious difference. There is every reason today for Catholics to be cooperating with our friends in the evangelical and Orthodox Jewish and Mormon and Muslim communities and other people of faith who are facing exactly the same challenges that we are facing. We have worked in the pro-life movement now for more than 40 years across those lines of religious difference. My Southern Baptist friend, we're actually not related, though his name is Timothy George, the great Southern Baptist theologian Timothy George, talks about an ecumenism of the trenches that arose, despite the historic animosities between Catholics and many evangelicals, that arose as a result of this work together in the pro-life movement. We need to continue that work, and we also need to work more with evangelicals and others on the marriage question and on this profoundly important question. Cardinal Sean is absolutely right, this profoundly important issue of religious freedom. Now, I want to say to you tonight, because I think we need to just face this. We shouldn't have our heads in the sand about this. I think we need to face this problem straight on. I want to say that the days of socially acceptable Christianity in the United States and throughout the West are over. Things will no longer be the way they were when I was a child, or certainly when my parents were children. The days of comfortable Catholicism are past. The days when it was just fine with everybody else if you were a Catholic. There might have been some old prejudices of the sort that John F. Kennedy faced in the campaign in 1960 when he was running against Richard Nixon. But you weren't considered to be a bad person because you were a faithful Catholic. Even people who thought you were misguided didn't think you were a bigot or a hater or a misogynist because of your commitment to Catholic teaching. But those days are gone. Things are now rough, and they're going to get rougher. And those of you who are parents, they're rough for your children. They're going to get rougher. And keeping your children faithful in the face of the pressures that they will face is going to be a very demanding job. It is simply no longer easy. It will certainly not be easy for them to be a faithful Christian, a good Catholic, an authentic witness to the truths of the gospel. Because today a price is demanded for that faithful witness. And that price must be paid. There are, in other words, to use a phrase from the great martyr to Nazism, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, there are costs of discipleship. Costs of discipleship. Costs that are burdensome and painful to bear. Now, of course, one can still safely identify oneself as a Catholic and even be seen going to Mass. And that's because the guardians of those norms of cultural orthodoxy, secular orthodoxy, that we've come to call political correctness, do not assume that because you identify as a Catholic or go to Mass, you necessarily believe what the Church teaches on issues such as marriage and sexual morality, the sanctity of human life, religious freedom, and the rights of conscience. Many self-identified Catholics do not believe those things. So the keepers and enforcers of the secular orthodoxy won't necessarily assume that because you go to Mass, you believe. And if one, in fact, does not believe what the Church teaches, or for now at least, even if one does believe those teachings but is prepared to be completely silent about them, one is safe. One can still be a comfortable Catholic. In other words, a tame Catholic, a Catholic who is ashamed of the gospel, or who is willing to act in public, at least, as if he or she is ashamed of the gospel, is still socially acceptable. No one will give you a hard time. Good luck keeping your kids in the faith, but no one will give you a hard time. But a Catholic or other believer, I find the same experience with my students. I find students actually seeking me out, graduate students, to work with me, although I'm a Catholic, though they come from the evangelical traditions or Orthodox or observant Jews, or they're Mormons or Muslims. Catholics or other believers who make it clear that they are not ashamed of the teachings of their faith, that they believe them, they're going to live by them, they're going to uphold them, they're going to proclaim them. Those believers who are not tame must be prepared to take risks and make sacrifices. You see, the saving message of the gospel of Jesus Christ includes integrally, not as a sideline, part of the very substance of the thing, the scriptural witness to the profound and inherent dignity of the human person and the nature of marriage as a conjugal bond, a one-flesh union. Believing these things is a crucial part of the gospel, of what it means to be a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ. Now, these teachings are not the whole gospel. Christianity requires much more than their affirmation. But they are integral to the gospel. They are not optional or dispensable. If they were optional or dispensable, one could say, I'm a perfectly good Catholic, even if one believed in abortion or euthanasia or assisted suicide, or redefining marriage to include same-sex partners or polyamorous groups of 3 or 4 or 5 people. But of course, because they are integral to the gospel, one cannot be a faithful Catholic and believe such things. To be an authentic witness to the gospel is to proclaim these biblical truths, the biblical truths, biblical and natural law truths about the precious life of the child in the womb, about marriage as the conjugal union of husband and wife, about religious freedom and the rights of conscience. The gospel, the Christian message, theologians call the kerygma, is, as Pope St. John Paul the Great said, a gospel of life. And it is a gospel of family life as well. And it is these integral dimensions of the gospel that powerful cultural forces and currents today demand that we either deny or suppress, go silent about, don't talk about, step away from. Now remember what the gospel says itself about being a Christian. Remember what Jesus says. What does he say? Let me quote him. If anyone wants to be my disciple, let him take up his cross and follow me. That's a tough teaching, isn't it? If you want to be a Christian, don't expect to be comfortable. Don't expect to have it easy. Being a Christian means bearing that heavy weight of the cross, just as Jesus did on his way up to Golgotha to be crucified. It's always struck me as one of the great proofs of the Christian religion, Cardinal, that Christianity would be a missionary faith going out there to convert the world, commissioned by Jesus himself, the founder, to go out and make disciples of all nations, when the product that we're supposed to offer people to get them to join is not, you're going to be wealthy, you're going to be powerful, you're going to be influential, people are going to really like you. No, what's the product? We're out there selling the Jesus story. You say, oh no, you who are not a Christian, you who may be from a pagan nation, we want you to join us. And the guy says, well, what do I get out of it? Oh, you get to take up your cross and follow Jesus to crucifixion. Only a true religion can make such a crazy claim and make it work. But you know what? This teaching about Christianity being a matter of taking up your cross, being willing to make that profound sacrifice, even face martyrdom, we Christians in the West having become comfortable, often wealthy, influential, having prestige, status, having it good, we Christians have forgotten, or perhaps ignored, that timeless gospel truth about what it really means to be a Christian. Putting the cross on the shoulder, following Jesus on Calvary. But let me tell you something, my friends. We might have ignored it for decades, for generations. There will be no ignoring it now. Things have changed. Things are now different. Powerful forces and currents in our society, and living up here where you live, you know what I'm saying is true. You're in the vanguard. It's going to be tougher here than it is in other parts of the country, although they'll get there. They'll get to where you are now. But powerful forces and currents in our society press us to be ashamed of the gospel. Ashamed, that is, of our faith's teachings on the sanctity of human life in all stages and conditions. Ashamed of our church's teaching on marriage, the biblical teaching from Genesis 1, shared by Christians and Jews, as the conjugal union of husband and wife. And these forces insist that historic Christian teachings are out of date, retrograde, insensitive, uncompassionate, illiberal, bigoted, even hateful. Just ask the Boston Globe. These currents bring pressure on all of us, and on young Christians in particular, to yield to this insistence. And my friends in the other communities, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs tells me, speaking from the Jewish point of view, President Eyring from the LDS Church, speaking from the Mormon point of view, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, the founder of Zaytuna College, the first Muslim liberal arts college in the United States, tells me the same thing, speaking from the Islamic point of view. Their children are under the same pressure. They can no more shield them from these pressures than we Catholics can shield our children. Even in somewhat insular communities, within some of the Orthodox Jewish communities, within the Mormon community in Utah, they still find their children absorbing the same ideologies, being brought under the same pressures that our children and grandchildren experience. And these forces, again, you can ask the Globe, threaten us with consequences if we refuse to call what is good evil and what is evil good. They command us to conform our teaching to their orthodoxy, or else, you have an alternative, you have a choice, just keep silent. Don't say anything at all. But we believe, we Christians believe, the truth in its fullness about the dignity of the human person in all stages, beginning with the child in the womb, extending to the frail elderly person or cognitively disabled or severely handicapped person. And so we reject abortion and infanticide and euthanasia and assisted suicide. And we believe the truth about the nature of marriage and sexual morality as proclaimed by the church for 2,000 years. Father Medeiros was right to lift up Blessed Paul VI this evening, because with the weight of the world's elite bearing down on him to yield at the height of the sexual revolution to the new orthodoxy, the new secular orthodoxy on sexual morality, Paul VI remained firm, would not yield, spoke the truth in love, in his gentle ways, like Cardinal Sean, in his gentle way, but still spoke the truth in that great encyclical, Humanae Vitae. There's some pretty powerful evidence that the Holy Spirit is sticking with the church and guiding her. Think of the pressure Paul VI was under to cave in. All the other churches had caved, beginning with the Anglicans at the Lambeth Conference in 1929. Do you know that the entire Christian world, East and West, Protestant and Catholic, was united on the teaching against contraception until 1929. Part of the polemic waged against the Catholic Church by some of the Protestant reformers was that priestly celibacy was a form of contraception, saying no to having children. But yet, when all the other churches folded, and many believed that the Catholic Church would go the same way because that was the enlightened way to go, that was going to bring liberation and happiness. Remember even the songs of the 60s, like Age of Aquarius? Harmony and understanding, sympathy and trust. No more falsehoods or divisions, golden living, dreams of visions, mystic crystal revel, and the mind's true liberation. That was the story. But Paul VI refused to yield. We Christians believe that every member of the human family, irrespective of age or size or stage of development or condition of dependency, is the bearer of a profound, inherent, and equal dignity. That's our basic story. We get this not only from our rational reflection on the human condition, but it's proposed in Genesis 1. The Lord of the universe, God himself, makes man in his very image and likeness. We hold that the precious child in the womb, therefore, as a creature made in the very image and likeness of God, deserves respect and protection. So powerful people and institutions, as a result of our pro-life witness, say we are misogynists who pose a threat to what they call reproductive freedom. That's more Boston Globe, New York Times talk. Reproductive freedom. They accuse us of waging a war on women. You've heard that rhetoric, right? We should, they tell us, be ashamed of our position on abortion and human life. And we Catholics believe that the core function of marriage, the core social function of marriage, is to unite a man and a woman as husband and wife to be mother and father to any children born of that union. We hold that the norms that shape marriage as a truly conjugal partnership are grounded in its procreative nature. That's the Paul VI story in Humanae Vitae, a true story. We celebrate marriage for its singular aptness for the project of child rearing. We understand marriage as the uniquely comprehensive type of bond, comprehensive in that it unites spouses in a bodily way and not merely at the level of hearts and minds or emotions, that's oriented to and would naturally be fulfilled by the husband and wife conceiving and rearing children together. And so, because we bear that witness to biblical truth, powerful people and institutions say we are homophobes, bigots, haters, people who do not believe in equality. They even say we represent a threat to people's safety. Once again, they insist we should be ashamed of our position on marriage. You see what we're being invited to do here? It's very clear. We're being invited to do the very thing that Jesus himself warned us against. We're invited to be ashamed of the gospel. When we are invited to distance ourselves from these Judeo-Christian, natural law teachings, or to go silent about them, when we are threatened with opprobrium or the loss of professional opportunities or business or social standing, if we do not, we are being pressured to be ashamed of the gospel, which means to be willing to give up on the lordship of Jesus and hope in his triumph, the triumph of goodness, righteousness, and love through him. So, my friends, to be a witness to the gospel today is to make oneself a marked man or woman. That wasn't true not so very long ago. It is true today. It is to expose oneself to scorn and reproach. To unashamedly proclaim the gospel in its fullness is to place in jeopardy, quite possibly, one's security, one's personal aspirations and ambitions, the peace and tranquility one enjoys, one's standing in polite society. I've had Catholic and evangelical students tell me of their fear of even mentioning their faith, much less their moral beliefs, the moral beliefs connected to their faith, not only in classes, but even in dormitory or refectory conversations. They fear that they will suffer opprobrium, reproach, be called names, that they might even jeopardize their futures. As you'll probably not think I'm lying to you if I tell you that the students I teach at Princeton and Harvard are pretty ambitious. Yeah, they're pretty ambitious. They're afraid, in many cases, they're afraid that if they post something on Facebook that reveals them, that outs them, exposes them as being pro-life or really for true marriage, that could maybe mean they won't get into law school or won't get a job at a big law firm or with a big investment banking firm. Or it might jeopardize their futures or social standing in some other way. One may, in consequence of one's public witness, be discriminated against. It's happening all over the country. You all probably know the story of Brendan Eich, the great tech genius who lost his job at Mozilla, the people who do the Firefox, at Mozilla out in California, because he had contributed some money to the California initiative to protect marriage as the conjugal union of husband and wife. Forced out. Straight up victim of discrimination on the basis of his moral beliefs. One may lose valuable opportunities for employment or professional advancement, as Brendan Eich did. One may be excluded from worldly recognition and honors of various sorts. One's witness may even cost one treasured friendships. If you are, as I have been, a very public witness on behalf of these great, profound, historic natural law and religious teachings, you will have the experience of a friend writing to you, probably by email, saying, our friendship is over. If that's what you think, our friendship is over. It may even produce, and perhaps some in this room have experienced it, familial discord, family trouble, even alienation from family members. These are what I mean when I talk about the costs of discipleship, the heavy costs of discipleship in an age in which we can no longer be comfortable Catholics or acceptable Christians. So there is no avoiding the question. Am I willing, or am I in the end simply unwilling to stand with Christ by proclaiming his truths? His truths that in our day and age are most unpopular truths. Yes, the days of comfortable Catholicism really are over. Fearing to place in jeopardy the wealth we've piled up, the businesses we've built, the professional and social standing we've earned, the security and tranquility we enjoy, the opportunity for worldly advancement we may cherish, the connections we have cultivated, the relationships we treasure, will we silently acquiesce to the destruction of more innocent human lives or the demolition of marriage? There is simply no avoiding this question. It would be nice if we could. It's not a luxury that's available to us. The challenge to our faith and fidelity today does not come in the way it came to St. Peter. You remember how it came to St. Peter. It was at that darkest moment, late Holy Thursday evening, early Good Friday morning, when Jesus had been taken away, beaten, scourged, put on trial, sent to Herod, and then before Pilate. And Peter, still hovering in the area, the other apostles with the exception of John, who stood by Jesus, had fled. But Peter was still hovering around the area. The gospel tells us he was warming himself by the fire. And one of the maids, one of the women working there, said to him, "Surely you are this man's disciple." And what did Peter say? "Oh no, I do not know the man." But she persisted. "Even your accent, your Galilean accent gives you away. You are this man's disciple." And then Peter began to curse and say, "I tell you, I do not know the man." That's how the challenge came to Peter. It's not going to come to us in that way. It's going to come to us in a different form, but it will be the same challenge. It won't be, "Surely you are this man's disciple." It will be, do you stand for the sanctity of human life? Do you stand for the dignity of marriage as the union of husband and wife? And we're going to be tempted to say the equivalent of, "I tell you, I do not know the man." Powerful forces tell us that our defeat in the causes of marriage and human life are inevitable. They warn us that we are on, you've heard this so many times, right? The wrong side of history. They insist that we will be judged by future generations the way we today judge those who championed racial injustice. That's part of the "why you should be ashamed" narrative. But my friends, let's not be fooled. Let's not be tricked. History does not have sides. History is an impersonal and contingent sequence of events. Events that are determined in decisive ways by human deliberation, judgment, choice, and action. The future of marriage, even today, and of countless human lives, can and will be determined by people's judgments and choices. Our judgments and choices. Our willingness or unwillingness to bear faithful witness. Our acts, either of courage or of cowardice. Nor is history or future generations a judge invested with godlike powers to decide, much less dictate, who was right and who was wrong. The idea of a judgment of history, this idea of a judgment of history that you're constantly threatened with, this idea of a judgment of history is secularism's vain, meaningless, hopeless, and pathetic attempt to devise a substitute for the final judgment of Almighty God. History is not God. God is God. History is not our judge. God is our judge. One day, each of us will give an account of all we have done and failed to do. Let none of us suppose that we will be making this accounting of ourselves to some impersonal sequence of events possessing no more power to judge than a golden calf or a carved and painted totem pole. No, it is before God, the God of truth, the Lord of history, that we will stand. And as we tremble in his presence, it will be no use for any of us to claim that we did everything in our power to put ourselves on the right side of history. God will not be interested in that. One thing and one thing alone will matter. Was I a faithful witness to the gospel? Did I do everything in my power to place myself on the side of truth? Truth does have sides. The one whose only begotten Son tells us that he alone is the way, the truth, and the life, will want to know from each of us whether we sought the truth and sought it with a pure and sincere heart. Whether we sought to live by the truth authentically and with integrity. and whether we stood up for the truth, speaking it out loud and in public, bearing the costs of discipleship that are inevitably imposed on faithful witnesses to truth by cultures that turn away from God and his law? Or are we ashamed of the gospel? Father, thank you again for this opportunity to be here this evening, and congratulations on the work you're doing at the seminary. Thank you, Cardinal Sean.